the client may be having a snowstorm inside, but the language would be presented as if it is rainy outside. They would go into analyzing the rain, have an umbrella, but the snowstorm cannot be addressed. Hello, everyone. This is Tijen Genco, and you're tuned into Coaching with Mastery and Elegance with Tijen Genco. And I have my usual companion, Sajili Mohan Chawla, with me today. Well, hello, Sajili.
Hello, Tijen. Very happy to be here.
Glad to have you here. So, this is the season 2 of this series. And we decided to get into that with more focus on my published book around Comprehensive Coaching Taxonomy. In this series, our intention is to support the coaches, mentors, and assessors how to utilize this book to evolve the coaching to the next level. And we will take these series in each episode to unpack some sections of that. With that said, Sajili, where would you like to take us today in this first episode of season 2?
Wonderful. Well, I think I must start by just reading a couple of lines from the book, because the book itself starts in such an impactful manner. And I mean, I'm just going to take your permission and read. And, the purpose of the book, and I quote you, most schools and mentors teach coaches what to ask. I think this will also tell the listeners why we decided to unpack the book.
Yes.
So most schools and mentors teach coaches what to ask. Here, I, as in Tijen, teach the architecture of inquiry and reflection, an exploratory and attuned invitation into self-discovery and inner recognition, a way of revealing the client's present state of presence and their relational orientation to the world around them. This book exists to make the invisible visible. And I just thought that is probably one of the most clear ways of understanding partnering, which we, sort of speak about, right? And if you will allow me just one more. So since you say that I teach the architecture of inquiry and reflection, and even here the taxonomy is on that, I just want our listeners to know that inquiry, very simply in one line, has been explained as where the client is expressive and the coach is receptive. Of course, Tijen, you've given a lot of explanation around what that really means, but just I'm going to leave it at that. And reflection is when the coach is expressive with that groundwork done, and then the client becomes receptive and, gets into that regenerative state. So I just thought we could elaborate on that. And just to go back, one more little thing I wanted to read, which is that this is not a book of good questions. It is a book about how to perceive, how to think, how to listen, how to intervene, and how to relate masterfully at the level of deepening, meaningful human development.
Yes.
Right? So it's actually written for coaches seeking mastery, mentor coaches, assessors, trainers, supervisors, leaders, and communicators, and anyone who wants to understand the architecture of transformational language.
Yes.
So I think that there's a lot in there.
Yes.
And if the listeners are already wondering what's in the book, let me just add that inquiry and reflection is elaborated across 5 domains: felt sense, perceptual and structural, field, systematic and symbolic, visioning in future architecture, integration, and embodiment. And therefore, I think our thought that let's take one domain for each podcast so that we can give a fair flavor of it to our listeners.
Yes, that's a great idea.
So we can start with the first domain, which is the felt sense domain, and cover both felt sense inquiry and felt sense reflection as we unpack this domain. So I think the most logical question is if you can just tell us what the domain really is and what it is not.
Yeah. So the felt sense, if we think about it, that if we all agree that this is a physical world, and human beings, as I often talk about, a complex structure, and our cognitive structures are at the deeper layers. But the felt sense is much more at the superficial layer of human being. Mm-hmm. And it's much more lesser subtle in the experience than a cognitive processing, intuitive processing, and all that. That's so there is a significant amount of data in that presence. And felt sense is often precognitive. We sense and then we make a meaning out of it. Or sometimes, as I call it, that it's as a result of conditioned cognition. Sometimes that it's almost reactive, right? In order for us to emote, we need to sense something and then interpret it in a way. Then we feel happy about it, sad about it, angry about it, or whatever it may be. But it's before we make a meaning. That's why I said precognitive. And it's also preconditioned. There is some level of reception, and then there's a reaction to that. So this domain exists to explain that level of processing and then meaningfully include that within the human change facilitation. It's not simply that, oh, you're happy, you're sad, whatever, but what makes you respond to this situation with this level of emotional intensity, right? What is it producing that? What makes your shoulder to become an earring, right? Talking about this. And as you're talking about this, I remember a mentor call. This person just published a book, and she was talking about the book like this, like, what doesn't make sense? You just published a book that you've been working on 3 years. I sense no energetic response to it. What is going on? And then she found out, oh, she's mourning because she attached to the project for 3 years. It's like postpartum depression. You know, we wouldn't recognize these things unless we include them into the space of change. That's why this domain exists.
So, well, I'm glad you elaborated it in so many ways, because then I think the first thought which comes to me is that we are really looking at, when we say partnering with the client, at what levels and with what nuance are we partnering? You know, it's not just at the cognitive level or the apparent somatic level.
Correct.
You know? So what we are really, with the help of the way you've detailed it in the book and what we'll speak about is so what is being felt before the client is getting into an interpretation and a story of it.
Correct.
That is being brought alive.
Correct. And you also asked me what this is not. This
Yes.
is not a trauma
Mm.
unpacking. It is not an interpretation of energy, mystical approach, energy healing. It's not that. It's very really systematic, inclusive response to
Mm.
what's taking place.
Mm. And this systematic inclusive response is the significant data you speak about.
Correct.
Yes, yes, yes. So typically, I think what comes to me then is that um, probably the need to elaborate this is because there are common misconceptions around this domain. Anything you want to add to that in terms of what kind of misconceptions you may have come across? Because you yourself are an assessor.
Yes, I think that people are often concerned about getting into an emotional dialogue, energy
Mm.
language, somatic language. And those are misconceptions that the energy, emotions can be certainly included. And it depends on the how you really respond. We will get into those later on. But these are, or that they think about executive coaching,
Mm.
that there is no room for somatic or energetic inquiries, maybe a little bit of emotions. And I disagree, because then the information is not processed fully. You're taking maybe this whole remote control and only looking at this one button. What is happening to the rest of it, right? So these are misconceptions that the persons has to be responded analytically. There is no room for energetic discussion, that not people cannot understand somatic language. Um, these those are the main uh,
Sure. Sure.
yeah.
I'll move one step further then. So when does this domain become active? Is it we see a trigger in the client? Is it situational, or we feel it's more developmental? In which context would you say this domain comes alive in our coaching?
This domain never is not alive,
Interesting. Sorry,
because
but the minute I asked the question and I thought of what you had just said, I was like, "Hmm." But yes,
yes,
thank you.
this domain never is not alive. Even in the cognitive expression, it
Mm.
still is alive, right? We're analyzing something that is producing some level of response that we're not happy with, right? Every change is about that. So it is always alive. And as you know, that I use the language of access. So then the question becomes, when is it alive, and when is it the coach needs to respond to? I would just respond in a way. Sometimes the access language is more appropriate through the channels of somatic access, through the channels of energetic access, through the channels of emotional access. It is the discernment of that, but it is always alive. And yeah.
Mm. And so I clearly see that. Um, d- so does this domain express differently? I mean, is it influenced by culture the identity which comes therefrom?
Absolutely. The cultural cognitive distortions or upbringing or shaping has different responses. It's been 5, 6 years ago I read this. I don't know if it's still true. When they were doing a research about anorexia, they found it that it didn't exist in India.
Mm.
because the certain female form was more appreciated. So that you can already understand, right? That, for example, when somebody puts a few pounds on an American culture where the physical form is so forefront, could produce a very depressive responses or anger or upset into in the American culture, for example, where I live, versus maybe in Africa or India or some other culture, it's welcomed. So then the one will feel happy about it. So it is certainly cultural, learned. We also learn from just like the fear responses, right? If you learn to love the dogs from your parents, your body will be relaxed around a dog, even if it's a German Shepherd. But if you learn to be fearful, your body is going to respond. So there is significant amount of cultural shaping. How do we
Yes.
respond to certain events?
And I think in today's times when a lot of coaching happens online and you have cross-cultural coaches and clients, I think this is something very important to be sensitive to.
Yes,
And
so
I recollect once in one of the groups that we were studying with you, uh, there was a client who, while she lived in the US, but she grew up in Japan,
yes,
and some of her responses to whatever she brought to the table were very skillfully picked up by you as having that cultural impact of her growing up years and the contradiction of it in her environment in the US.
yes. There
Mm.
is a lot. So the cultural fluency is a significant asset that the coach can gain. Obviously, that we can act like a Romans in Rome, but we may never be a Roman. That's understood. But at least if we understand what the Romans do in Rome, then
Mm.
we can at least have a language of access again. Yeah.
So I'm going to move now to, in this context, then, what really is the responsibility of the coach in the context of partnering? I mean, it sounds like, uh, you know, we are attending to the whole of the client.
Yes.
So in terms of the posture, the energetic, the stance, we are now getting into all those aspects of it. So, any attunement or any specific thoughts which you have around, look, this really becomes the responsibility of the coach.
Yes, and I don't know if we already said that in as we dive into the felt sense domain. What I addressed in the book under this domain were the emotional inquiries and reflections, somatic inquiries and reflections, and an energetic inquiries and reflections. So, this is certainly that the coach's awareness within the under this category is significant to bring what is being received onto the table for discussion to support the change facilitation. For example, this is often happening more so than now. I'm noticing that there is a disconnect, and the language that people use, I compartmentalize these things. Executives often use that. So the client may be having a snowstorm inside,
Mm.
but the language would be presented as if it is rainy outside. then if the coach is not attuned fully, they would go into analyzing the rain, have an umbrella, whatever it is. But the snowstorm cannot be addressed. So we need to really understand these indicative language, emotional language can come through the linguistic patterning. The somatic responses can be observational or can come through the linguistic expressions of the client. Even then, that coach, I would invite coaches to look and get curious, not just take the client's verbatim as the truth. But like I said, in my language, the coach was explaining, I just published my book for 3 years and it was like a frozenness in it, right? It's just to take and understand and notice, and then get curious about those to reflect and inquire and co-create.
So I think some caution, the responsibility can also then be rephrased as some caution in terms of being aware that one is not staying with the story, or one is just not naming the either the emotion or the somatic energetic field, but really exploring it, uh, not directing the client in that sense in these spaces.
Absolutely, the spaciousness is the key. It's okay to present the idea that instead of saying to somebody, you are sad, but saying there seems to be some kind of sadness in our space, although I'm hearing your expression talks about celebratory event. So then they can take it and decide. Or we could just say, oh, your energy is shrinking here, and assuming something. So the main coaching responses never is different here in any domain, that we need to be spacious, not attaching our observations, and not getting into metaphysical analysis. Obviously,
Sure.
yeah.
I get reminded again, we were in a group in one of your classes, and the one of us was being the client, and there was some grief and so on. And as the conversation progressed, and you, of course, were the coach, I remember now, and this is to the point that the field is always alive. You said there seems to be grief and relief. And that was such a turning point in that conversation, because it was just a subtle emergence of something, and you named it. And you put it out there in that spacious manner, which helped the client then recognize, oh, there's been a shift.
And this is why that I often, yes, there is an idea that the coaches should not name the emotion. I don't necessarily, I don't subscribe to that thought. It is okay to present because we are equal partners, but to present it in a way that there is a spaciousness, not attaching to the client, but sharing like just something, there is a possibility.
Yeah. Yeah. So maybe this is a little bit of spoon feeding, but really, to take this, if so, we have within the felt sense umbrella, there is an emotional aspect, a somatic and energetic. So, what would inquiry sound like in terms of the tonality of it? If you can just give an example of what that an inquiry would sound like, and then what would a reflection sound like in this
Yeah,
topic?
so let's say something that I often see as an assessor, even at the MCC levels, that when the client say, for example, I have a discussion with my boss and I feel upset about it. Now, that's a linguistic expression of some emotional presence, right? So then I hear this in every level. Tell me more. Now, what that does mechanistically, that it asks the client go deeper into what makes them upset, feel more, to report about it more to the coach. Is it necessary? I don't think so. We don't need more details. So then the more effective way of relating to that, okay, so there seems to be an something is making, produces the upset about this discussion. What makes this discussion result in an upset for you? Now, then the client has to exit the event and look into the dynamics through the meta awareness level. This is an emotional inquiry, but it doesn't put the client into the emotional pool to drain themselves. Right? That's a more effective way of relating and inquiring. So there seems to be an upset, then we're validating that we heard. And we can also point out that if there were we observing discrepancies, maybe client is saying there is an upset, but then they are laughing at the same time, right? Sometimes we do that, or they talk about upset, but they have more sad demeanor. We can then reflect on that. And they talk about upset, and when we think about anger, is a very potent emotion, right? Is it sad anger? Is it an like anger, right? Upset can be in both. So we could get into that. What is the upset? Really, what is named as an upset? And so the inquiries can be in that what's being present, and how is it being presented, and then the reflections can be on those, right? I'm hearing upset, but I'm hearing more like a volcano brewing underneath of it, then I'm showing them that that is
Yes.
like a potent upset, and so on. How is that?
No, that makes me link up to what you said right at the beginning of what the domain is, because the minute I say "tell me more," somehow chances are very high that the client is going to go deeper into the not just the emotion, but also the story,
Correct.
which the client is already aware of. I mean, they've repeated it a couple of times, and when they're bringing it, right? And the domain really is, you said, less subtle, precognitive, before we are making, what is the feeling. So exploring the upset, devoid of the interpretation and the story, meaning making in it.
Details. Yes,
Yes.
the narrative details. We don't need that,
Yeah.
because every
Yeah.
time that the coach responds in a way, whether via reflection or inquiry, that gets the client to tell more about the narrative details. What is it that they're doing mechanistically? They are actually supporting the client to attach to that level of cognitive processing deeper and deeper. And they also buy in and agree with the characters in the story. I often say to my students, don't take a side. The client's presentation is one way of the story being told. And if that story was told in the way that was helping the client, then we didn't have a story, right, in that session. So there is something wrong in that narrative. We need to not take a side and not invite client more into the narrative, which is going to come in our next domain to talk about it more. Yes.
And would you like to say anything about the tonality of reflection under this domain?
Absolutely. Again, it needs to be a little bit more spacious.
Sorry, if I could just add for our listeners that this specifically is to help us as coaches and assessors and mentors distinguish between the tone of inquiry and the tone of reflection. So,
Yes.
context
So
of
the
yeah.
tone of reflection then again needs to be spacious and representative of what the coach is observing. That may include what the client verbally expressed or what was the energetic overtone, energetic undertone, somatic expressions in the body, right? That, for example, there was this recording I reviewed where the client came to the session with a significant, terminally considered cancer diagnosis and explaining how overwhelmed they are crying, and telling the coach should they tell it to their workplace or not, and they don't want people to feel pity about it. And the coach's response was, okay, so what I'm hearing is that you want to find strategies to how to share this with your work. Now, was that cognitively wrong? No, because they are responding to what the client said and at some level. But is that the magnitude of what's being shared? Not necessarily. So in that case, the reflection would sound like, I'm so sorry. This seems as if it is a significant amount of change and producing a magnitude of emotions in your experience, and the worry about how to respond to this in the personal life and how to share and what to do in the work life. Being in that state and the fact that you just received this news, what might be helpful in our conversation? Now, I'm holding the client. This is a stationary reflection and the stationary questioning, right? I'm showing them there is a presence and something not digested yet. And then checking into partner. How is that?
So, of course, everything which you said is wonderful. What I've also, and I'm sure our listeners have heard it as well, is truly the tone. There was from when we were speaking, there was there was a softness and an empathetic holding of what is actually happening in that present moment for the client. So it's not was just not in the words, which were of course beautiful, but it was also in your tone. There was such a clear shift from our conversation, and I can feel that lowering of excitement and tone in me, even as I'm relaying this to you.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
And the thing is, sometimes when the coach wanted to respond to the emotions, that's not also always helpful. If they said, oh my goodness, that's so hard, now reaffirming the hardness and making it even worse, right? So what we say, how we say it, how we deliver it makes a lot of there is a lot of significance in that. And this is where I say the coach is supportive, coach is not supportive. right? Asking somebody, tell me more about that. Oh my goodness, what is it? What a nightmare going, right? Going through this. Although it can be a nightmare, it is a nightmare. But what we say, how we present, is that supportive of what needs to happen by what the client is asking? Or is it not supportive? That's the other aspect that we need to look at.
Sure, sure. So, you think we can use this example, and maybe we will repeat ourselves, but it might become even more clear to distinguish between what the coach was listening for, what the coach was listening into, and what the coach was listening with. And do you think we should use this example to again reiterate that?
Absolutely. What the coach was listening for makes a big difference, right? Because if they are only listening for analytical,
Mm.
linguistic indicators, that's what they're gonna get. And if they're listening into the field, and besides the words, what is underneath the words, what comes with the words, right? When we're going into somebody's house, we have a coat, we have a hat, it depends on the timeline. And what else when we take it underneath, what comes out. And so these are all things that coach can listen into. What is their intuition? What is the emotional tone? What is the word meaning? What is the energetic imprint in the field? And all that. And what is the coach listening with? Is the coach listening with their own needs? Oh, I need to be successful. I need to do this. I need to help the client to go somewhere, right? Those are the cognitive distortions and the unmet needs. Their desire to be sound intelligent, their desire to be sound this and that. In fact, last month I listened another review of a session for an individual mentor client. They spend 20 minutes of the session teaching the client a technique.
Mm.
And then they told the client at the end, we don't have time for this now, whatever the client was going to
Mm.
process. So if the coach wants to use the technique to look very successful or whatever, that's their listening with, right? So we need to be aware of all that, our own biases, our own cognitive distortions, however much we can be aware of what are we listening with, right?
And in that instance, which you, when you started with the example, you said the client, the coach went into. So, what are the strategies so that one can, resolve it at the
Yeah,
workplace, right? So that again speaks about the whole problem solving, fixing, and then feeling useful and successful through
correct.
that.
Unmet
Yeah,
need or the
yeah.
conditioned role. I mean, some of the coach schools are teaching this, right? In order to be successful, client has to come to a place of action. But is the action helpful here in this
Mm.
discussion? The action oriented coaching isn't always the indication of a success. What the nature of the coaching conversation is asking for. It's a little bit outside of this discussion and domain, but it is important to understand what type of session outcome is appropriate, and then responding to that is part of also that listening with and responding with.
it's also in a part of this whole being sensitive and being alive to what is there. There's also the question of timing.
Mhm.
I mean, there is a time for action. So to be able to gauge when is it premature in that sense.
Yes, and the thing is, if we don't understand how the client's interior, the system is responding, now I'm giving keep examples from this felt sense domain because that's what we're discussing. If we're not understanding again what produces that human biology response, which emotions are part of, what produces the tightness in the neck and rolling the eyes or whatever it is, what produces the flatness in the energy, what produces the spike in the energy, what produces depletions in the energy. If we don't understand these things, then our responses are going to fall short, and we can get to an action, but that action isn't going to be sustainable because it is not understood what is that currently falling short, that in the client's system that couldn't get themselves into the native action. We can then keep looking for external accountability measures, external things to hold the system in place. But if we resolve that every time I'm hearing something, like, I don't know, if somebody says, let me give you a critique on this, and if I am receiving that a personal attack, there is no way I'm going to hear somebody at work. Now, you can teach me to stay present and receive and be assertive and say something, all those things. But what makes my system hyper responsive to that critique is the underlying emotion. If I don't understand and resolve that in a session, I can get to the action, but that action is not going to be settling into my system.
Yeah. So this then becomes the coach's assessment of the client's readiness and depth.
Availability of
Availability,
resources.
yes. And how do you how does a coach or mentor, assessor, or in fact even a leader, gauge whether the client is what is the readiness, what is the availability?
I say that gets into the competency 7. For me, as a mentor and assessor and a coach, is the most significant outcome of the session, not the action, but the awareness. Because if we start the session from the same level of awareness and end it with the same level of awareness, that already says there is no readiness and availability because nothing changed in the cognitive processing.
Mhm.
The client is at the same readiness and availability as they were at the end. Maybe they have more tools, strategies, or lists, but their interior hasn't changed to make themselves to more available to receive what they wish to receive energetically into their life. So that's the main indication. What has shifted? And that's where we get into the competency 8 says that the actions come out of the new awareness. So, how that new recognized, newly recognized information shifts, that's the indication of the readiness and availability. Sometimes we can become a lot aware of a lot of things. If you recall that the session you and I had, right? I asked you something and reflected on it. You put your eyeglasses 3-4 times, you turned around. Now that was an overwhelming response for you. Energetically, somatically, neurologically, you were expressing that to me. And that can tell me that it may take maybe a few sessions or a little bit of time for you to download that, to get fully ready to act. So it's not always the magnitude of the awareness or the lack of it, but everything matters in the assessment and the partnering, right? The client can also say, this is too much or too little. Yeah.
Maybe you need a water break, and I will ask my question till then. No, because you spoke about, and very rightly, I mean, I can almost feel it when, if there is no shift in awareness, then that's competency 7. And then moving into any action is the futility of it, the fleeting impact of it, if at all, which is again competency 8. But would you like to then now at this stage, since we've brought up competencies, speak about the competencies which do get activated as we move through this? Anything more you'd like to say from the perspective of assessors, mentors, and of course, coaches?
Yes, the felt sense domain actually is quite important for establishing trust and safety, right? In this example I gave earlier, when the client is going through this major traumatic event in the news, and the coach's response to that, very distant and analytically, maybe helping the client to stabilize and get them into the analytical domain, but it is also not necessarily establishing connection and the shared experience. So in that way, it's falling short. And then the competency 5, right? The coaching presence. Coach has to be present to receive, understand, support, to integrate, review, and produce a different or the same response for the client. Competency 7, we talked about, definitely helpful to facilitate and evoke awareness. And then competency 6, listening. Not only listening with the ears, but holistically, the client, intuitively, the client, what is happening somatically. Sometimes nowadays it's rare that the sessions are only in audio, but I even asked that. I actually prefer audio sessions, but nobody is asking them anymore. They ask, oh, well, you cannot see the somatic response in an audio session or neurologic response in an audio session. Yes, you can. If you actually pay attention to the vocals are going to give constriction, expansion, tension, pitch. So there are the ways to listen, to relate and understand. So the competency 6 as well is certainly this domain touches.
It's beautiful how the entire felt sense inquiry reflection process, and the aliveness of it. I mean, one, that it's alive through, and two, how it adds a certain gravitas to each of the competencies, instead of just flipping over and like a checklist and moving on.
That's why I wanted to write the book, because as you read from my book in the beginning, that unfortunately the coach training turned into, look at, these are the competencies, that's what you need to do in a session. So therefore coaches are not necessarily attending to the client. They're attending to the competencies. Did I do this? Okay. Did I do the next? So they're taking what the client said, shaping, forming into the competency response and responding to that. And that they, by that, actually, they're missing the competency response. But anyway, that's how they are doing. And the whole relational aspect and the trust and safety, and supporting the client's awakening are missed.
I get reminded, I think it was just 2 days ago, that this particular client I'm working with has a sense of the sense of feeling attacked by his boss, senior, which whatever it may be. And in the last session we had, the expression was, about another senior is in my corner, but this particular boss is not in my corner. And I actually stood up right there at the back. And I said, so when I'm in a corner and I put my hands out in a boxing ring, what is really happening? And you spoke about that shift in awareness, and one thing led to another. And he said, yeah, so there's always a fight. I'm looking and waiting and alert for an attack. Where is it coming from? And then, of course, one thing led to another, but it suddenly came alive to me that the shift in awareness happens with such subtlety.
Yes.
Mm.
Yes. Beautiful example. Yeah. Thank you for that.
So then for all of us coaches, I'm sure we are eager also to know, then are there any practices which can help us build fluency, or anything which you specifically feel has to be unlearned? And I know you have, I'm going to combine two things, stacking questions, but I'll take that liberty with you. And then correspondingly, I know you have such a kaleidoscope of courses designed for each of these. So if there is something with or without a corresponding course, that would be lovely. So
Certainly.
practices and courses, yeah.
Yeah, as you know, I often say that the work starts with us, right? And awareness. As a coach, how do I respond to my emotions? What do I know about my emotions? What do I know that what produces what emotions in me? What produces what visceral response in me? How are my organs and the whole system, fascia system or nervous system, is responding to the moment? What are my thoughts are producing in me? What are my energies? How I maintain my energy? How do I cast my energy? So these are a good curiosities, a good set of curiosities for the coaches to start becoming aware and present to, so that they can actually be present to observing in another human being and facilitating response, a different response or the same response for another human being. So that's that. It starts with the self-reflection and staying present, because if the coaches, this is another thing I see as a mentor and assessor, if the coach doesn't have a particular emotional resilience in a particular area, right? For example, is happiness is okay, but sadness is not okay. Then what's going to happen when the client presents sadness? Coach either going to rush them to a solution, or they are going to invite them out of that emotion without recognizing it. And so these types of awarenesses are important. And if the coach always giving value to their thoughts, but not necessarily what's happening to their body, which I call it walking around like a drone, right? No body, just a head. And literally, nobody is there to present.
Right. Right,
And
right, right, right.
it's an empty vessel. So then they cannot facilitate somebody to descend into that level of intelligence. If
Mm,
somebody has no idea how they cast their energy, is it in the past, in the future, is it in the present? What gets them away from the present? These are all energetic castings. So it's important to recognize these. And as it comes to my courses, obviously that I don't necessarily have a specific course around emotional intelligence, but the group mentorings are helpful for that.
mm,
And I do get into that level of awareness in the neurologic approach to coach training, as well as somatic approach to coach training. They are not in currently in the calendar. The somatic coaching is not currently in the calendar, but always receiving, open to receiving waiting lists for that. Neurologic approach to coach training is coming up. That is indicative to listening the neural pathways and how they actually respond to the somatic, neurologic, and as well as the emotional domain,
mm.
understanding the significance in each word that client presents. And energetic coaching is also I teach. Currently, it's not on the calendar, but
Mm.
waitlist is open for that as well. So these are certain tools alongside this book to practice.
Wonderful. Any last words which you have in terms of either the book or what made you call it the coaching taxonomy or anything about the felt sense?
Yes, I called it coaching taxonomy to get the people out of the competency related coaching framework to
Mm.
show. And even though I called it comprehensive coaching taxonomy, I am only presenting 16 types, that there is
Only
much
16.
more, and I'm calling it only, right? And there is much more nuances in the human
Mm.
energetic or somatic or emotional exchange, analytical exchange. And this is just the beginning of that revolution into high resolution coaching, high resolution relating. And I would say that this is significant time to engage in a learning expansion like this in relating to one another as humans, as we get deeper into integrating the AI into our worlds.
Mm.
Human relational experience, in my view, needs to be much more meaningful, relatable, brings depth, uh, to stay human.
Wonderful. Well, welcome to relational mastery with precision and elegance. I think that's what you say in your book, right? Thank you. Thank you so much, Tijen.
Thank you, Sajili. It's always
And
pleasure.
yes,
Yes,
and then the next time we shall speak about perceptual and structural. That'll be our domain, the inquiry and the reflection aspect of it.
thank
So
you for
thank you.
informing our audience also about what's to come. And if you like what you heard, I will provide the links for the upcoming courses with this description of the podcast. Thank you for tuning in.